Welcome back to Nordic Arms and History. In today's video, we're taking a look at a very interesting military effort that was not led by government, but by volunteers instead. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939, thousands of Swedish and even Norwegians and Danes left their homes behind to help Finland in their time of need. They weren't professional soldiers or even trained, but what they did have was a shared sense of identity and duty. Finlands sak är vår, or Finland's cause is ours. This is the story of the Svenska Frivilligkåren, or the Swedish Volunteer Corps, of courage on skis, bitter cold, and Nordic brotherhood in the face of war. When the Soviet Union attacked Finland on November the 30th, 1939, it wasn't just Finland that was shocked. Across the Baltic Sea in Sweden, the news hit home. Sweden and Finland share more than just geography. For over 600 years, they were one nation, until 1809, when Sweden ceded Finland to Russia. But the cultural, historical, and familial ties never broke. In the decades that followed, Sweden watched Finland grow into an independent nation, yet still felt a strong sense of kinship. In 1939, when that independence came under attack, something stirred deep within Swedish society. Officially, Sweden remained neutral. The government took a cautious line, especially wary of provoking Germany or the Soviet Union. After all, just months earlier, the two nations had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, dividing Eastern Europe between them. But among the Swedish people, the response was clear and immediate. The phrase Finlands sak är vår, Finland cause is ours, echoed in newspapers, town halls, and family dinner tables. What followed wasn't a government-led military campaign, it was a grassroots movement, a civilian initiative, and it would result in one of the most remarkable volunteer forces in Nordic history. Even before the first Soviet shell fell on Finnish soil, plans were already forming in Sweden. A small group of general staff officers, along with veterans of earlier conflicts like the Finnish Civil War, began preparing of the possibility of a Swedish volunteer force. They knew if a war came, many Swedes would want to help, and they were right. On the very day the Winter War began, volunteer registration offices were opened up across Sweden. Within weeks, over 12,000 Swedes signed up, alongside with more than 700 Norwegians as well. To put that into perspective, the Swedish military at the time had just started a major mobilization, yet thousands of ordinary citizens, many of whom had no formal training, were ready to go to war, not for Sweden, but for Finland. The force became known as Svenska Frivilligkåren, or the Swedish Volunteer Corps. It was funded by donations from both the public and Swedish industry. The state provided material support like uniforms, rifles, machine guns, and even artillery, but politically, the government kept its distance. The volunteers would wear Swedish gear, follow Swedish organization, but fight under Finnish command. And there wouldn't be a ragtag militia either. Under the leadership of General Ernst Linder, a seasoned officer who had fought in Finland during the 1918 Civil War, the Frivilligkåren would become a well-structured combat force. It was divided into three main battle groups, each with infantry, machine guns, mortar, anti-tank weapons, artillery, and logistical support. There was even an air component, Flygflot 19 or F-19, Sweden's unofficial air unit in Finland. The Swedish Volunteer Corps may have been made up by civilians, but it was built like a professional army. The entire force was organized into three main stridsgrupper or combat groups, each roughly the size of a reinforced battalion. These were supported by artillery batteries, anti-tank platoons, engineering units, supply companies, and even field hospitals. It was, for all practical purposes, a complete brigade. Each stridsgrupp had 3 rifle companies, 1 Jaeger or light infantry company, 1 heavy weapons company, an artillery battery, plow platoon, and a signal platoon. Supporting units included anti-tank detachments, air defense teams, transport and logistics companies, medical services including ambulances and even horse-drawn stretchers, and a dedicated engineering corps for building fortifications in snow-covered forests of Lapland. In the air, the volunteer force was backed by F-19, an independent air unit staffed by Swedish pilots flying Swedish aircraft operating out of northern Finland. Despite its size, F-19 proved surprisingly effective, shooting down enemy planes and even carrying out bombing raids. As for equipment, most of it came from Swedish military stockpiles. Volunteers were issued Mauser rifles and M36 uniforms, and standard field gear. It was all familiar to the men, which made training faster and logistics easier once they reached the front. Everything was arranged to make the Corps as independent and operational as possible without crossing the line into official Swedish military intervention. It was a delicate balancing act. Sweden remained neutral on paper, but the Frivilligkåren was very much ready for war. In late January 1940, the first group of Swedish volunteers crossed into northern Finland. After weeks of organizing and training in Kemi, it was time to face what they had come for: war. Their objective was a remote sector along the Salla front, in a region blanketed by dense forest and deep snow. The specific location, Markajärvi, a small Finnish village in Lapland, not far from the Arctic Circle. The terrain was unforgiving, vast, desolate, and utterly frigid. Temperatures often plummeted below minus 30 degrees, sometimes even minus 40 degrees Celsius. Frostbite, not bullets, was the first enemy that they had to fight. On February the 3rd, the 1st Stridsgrupp under Lieutenant Colonel Magnus Dyresen began a grueling ski march from Kemi to Rovaniemi, covering miles of snow-covered wilderness. Equipment was heavy, and many were still adapting to the harsh environment. Some men collapsed with frostbite. Others were pulled from the ranks due to illness or exhaustion. Just over a week later, the 2nd Stridsgrupp followed, led by Viking Tam. Together, these two forces were the spearhead of Sweden's unofficial military presence in the war. The Finnish plan was to rotate their exhausted troops out and replace them with the Swedish volunteers, but Soviet pressure in the Karelian Isthmus was escalating quickly. The timetable had to be accelerated. On February the 26th, the Swedish Volunteer Corps officially assumed responsibility for the Markajärvi sector, freeing up several Finnish battalions to reinforce the increasingly desperate defense of Viipuri. What followed was not a grand offense, but a brutal war of attrition. The front was static, the positions fortified. Volunteers found themselves digging trenches, laying barbed wire, building log bunkers, and maintaining supply lines through frozen roads and forests. But the danger was very real. Soviet artillery fire was sporadic but deadly. Snipers haunted the tree lines. Soviet patrols pushed at the lines under the cover of darkness. Swedish units were tasked with regular reconnaissance patrols, slipping through the snow on skis to scout enemy movements, and sometimes to engage in sharp and short firefights. One of the most significant losses came on March the 1st, when a Soviet shell struck a command post and killed Lieutenant Colonel Dyresen, one of the Corps' most respected leaders. He was the first Swedish officer to fall in the Winter War, and his death shook the entire volunteer force, but also hardened their resolve. Despite the conditions, morale among the volunteers remained surprisingly high. Many saw themselves not just as soldiers, but as defenders of something larger: Nordic identity, Finnish sovereignty, and a brotherhood that transcended borders. When the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed on March 13th, the war was over, at least officially. By then, over 4,000 Swedish volunteers had reached the Finnish front. Of those, 33 were killed and around 50 were wounded, and more than 130 of them suffered serious frost injuries, some resulting in lifelong disability. They had come to fight, and fight they did, not in massive battles, but in a hard, bitter campaign of endurance and solidarity. Their sacrifice did not change the outcome of the Winter War, but it changed how Finland remembered Sweden, and how the Swedes remembered themselves. The Swedish Volunteer Corps was by far the largest foreign contribution to Finland during the Winter War, but it wasn't the only one. Across Scandinavia, the Soviet invasion stirred a powerful emotional response in Norway. The phrase "Finlands sak är vår sak," or "Finland's cause is ours," quickly became a national sentiment. Over 700 Norwegians volunteered for service in Finland. Some enlisted with the Swedish Frivilligkåren, others were embedded directly into Finnish units. Among them were men that would later become legends. Max Manus, who would go on to become one of Norway's most decorated resistance fighters during the Second World War, served in Finland during the Winter War. There, he gained valuable experience in guerrilla warfare and winter operations, skills he would later use in sabotage missions against Nazi forces in Oslo. Another is Leif Larsen, better known as Shetlands Larsen, which we have done a war profiles on. Before ferrying agents and supplies between Scotland and occupied Norway, Larsen volunteered for service in Finland. These men, and others like them, saw the fight for Finland as the front line of a much larger struggle. But there were less known but no less courageous volunteers like Ragnar Cederborg, a young Norwegian who was killed in action. His name is remembered both on his grave in Trossa, Sweden, and on the monument at Markajärvi. What's striking is that none of these efforts were government mandated. These Norwegians and Danes volunteered out of principle, out of conviction, and often at great personal risk. They endured the same frostbite, artillery, and sniper fire as their Swedish comrades. Their presence may not have changed the outcome of the Winter War, but it changed something else. It showed that when one Nordic nation was attacked, the others would not stand idle. Today, their names live on in stone memorials across Finland, Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes, etched together in the history of war they were never required to fight, but chose to. When the guns finally fell silent on March 1940, Finland had survived, but at a tremendous cost. For the volunteers of the Swedish Volunteer Corps and their Norwegian and Danish comrades, the journey had come to an end. Some returned home quietly, bearing the wounds both visible and invisible. Others remained behind, buried in Finnish soil, far from the towns and families that they had left behind. Their impact was not measured in territory taken or battles won, but in what they represented, a message that neutrality did not mean indifference. The bonds of Nordic brotherhood ran deeper than politics or borders. Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, the commander-in-chief of Finnish forces, personally thanked the Swedish Volunteer Corps on March 28, 1940, a gesture that carried enormous weight. He knew, as did the Finnish people, that these men had not come out of obligation, but out of conviction. Some of those volunteers would return again in 1941 during the Continuation War, serving in units like the Svenska Frivilligkåren in Hangö, and others went on to fight in resistance movements across Europe. Men like Max Manus or Leif Shetlandslarsson, whose wartime legacies were only just beginning. Today, their memories live on in memorials scattered across Finland and in Sweden, especially in Markajärvi, where granite stones list the names of those who'd fallen. In cemeteries, on plaques, in old photographs, and sometimes in medals passed down through families. These were not professional soldiers, they were students, farmers, factory workers, and pilots. But when Finland called, they answered. In the long shadow of global war, the story of Scandinavian volunteers is a quiet one, but it is also one of the most powerful, a story of courage, unity, and of choosing to fight not because they had to, but because they believed it was right. I have some really interesting medals here in my collection I wanted to show you, as this one here and this one, in fact these two groups here, are really interesting because, well, they're both foreign versions. As you can see here, this is the Winter War and Continuation War participation medals in Finnish. So these would be given to a regular Finnish soldier. And you can see here, they're both in Finnish, and both really nice medals in my opinion. This one was, of course, given to the same person, so whoever was given this, of course, fought in both wars. As you can see here, really interesting. I like these medals a lot. Now, the second one is a really interesting grouping that I picked up. This one here is, of course, missing. This would be the Freedom Cross. And whoever this was a foreigner, because as you can see on the Winter War medal, it's a little bit bigger than the regular one. And on the back side, it has the version that is for volunteers. If I can focus, there we go. Very nice. And whoever this was fought in the Finnish Civil War in 1918, and then again in the Winter War. Now this one's actually missing a clasp here that would be showing what front they were at. And this one, of course, took direct combat from the Russians as well. Really sad that it's missing the Freedom Cross, and I'm actually looking to replace this as well, or get a replacement to put on this really nice grouping here. And the last medal set, which is, I think, really cool, is the Continuation War medal, as you can see compared to this one, but it's in Swedish. As you can see here, it's, instead of it being for, here you can see the differences. And of course, if we flip it back here, you can see it's just the same Finnish lion here. And I also have the actual miniature as well, as you can see here. Trying to get this camera to focus is hard. There we go. Pretty cool. Of course, I would love to see if I can find out who this was. Of course, we don't know. There was no information when I purchased this medal, this grouping, but I would love to see if I can find out who this was, because of course he got the Freedom Cross. He fought in 1918 for the Finnish Finnish independence, And of course, he fought in the Winter War against the Russians as well. Really cool, and I just wanted to show you the differences of the foreign medals and of course the Finnish ones as well, as this of course could have been a Swedish person that was in the Swedish Volunteer Corps that actually fought for Finland's side. And of course these are given to Swedish volunteers of the continuation war as well. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions regarding the Swedish Volunteer Corps or really anything else, feel free to comment them down below. Also, if you feel like this video deserves it and you feel like you learned something new, consider liking the video. And as always, if you want to learn more about Nordic arms and history, consider subscribing. Until the next one, take care. Bye-bye.